Oh, goody.
Alright, what's going on everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So in this one we have some interesting answers from the Marvel Snap Discord that clue us into some changes that are going to be joining the game pretty soon, most likely. Main three changes we're going to be talking about today are a potential buff to Elsa and Luke Cage, and nerfs towards the Destroy archetype, as well as kind of their philosophy towards balance and why it seems a lot of people aren't too happy with the fact that Destroy is going to be likely eating a nerf this coming OTA. So starting off with the Destroy nerf. Hey there, just wondering if Destroy is nearing your thresholds for what's deemed too strong or too common. And the response was, Destroy has been the strongest deck since we nerfed Blob, and was the second strongest deck during most of his reign. It's held the perch a little too long and a little too well. So yeah, it's gonna get nerfed. This is all but hard confirmation that, hey, this deck has been the second best or best deck for a while, might need to knock it down a peg. And I'm pretty interested in how they're going to do that in terms of just general predictions here. Destroy is a point-focused deck, right? What it does really well is it puts out more points than a lot of other decks are able to. And a big reason for that is Destroy is far and away the deck that takes the most advantage of, I think, a lot of different locations in the game. I really can't think of another deck that is able to leverage as many locations positively as Destroy is able to, and I think that's a big part of what makes it consistent. The other thing that just makes it so good is it got really perfect cards added to it over the course of 2023, big ones being X23 and Nico Minoru. These cards really shored up a lot of the weakness to it. For anyone who's been around with Snap since launch or close to launch, you might know Deadpool was actually a meme for a really long time, but as cards have changed, the Destroy deck has just gotten better and better, and while I don't think anyone thinks it's impressive, I'm not overly surprised that they are going with this decision. Now, in terms of what they might do to change Destroy, since it is a point-focused deck, I expect them to go for reducing the points of the deck. And what are the ways to do that? Well, after taking a look at some of the stats behind the deck, I think the likely thing that's going to end up getting hit here is Carnage. I think if they want to take points away from Destroy, Carnage is probably not a bad way to do it. And at the same time, it also reduces the point output that Destroy has in its early game, which maybe makes them a bit more susceptible to things like Armor or Cosmo to shut down what they're trying to do. Some ideas I've heard about how this might be changed are, well, maybe they make it a 2-3, but it only buffs by +1, or maybe they just make it a 2-0, so reducing the initial 2 power it has on the body and making it a bit weaker of a target to something like Shadow King. And given Second Dinner's history of nerfs, neither of those changes would really surprise me. It's possible they could take the points from somewhere else in the archetype, but I do think generally it's most likely that they're going to be going for a points-focused change. There is another change I could see them doing, but it's a change I really hope they don't do, and that involves X23. One of the reasons Destroy has been so incredibly powerful is the fact that X23 is allowing them to play more cards a turn, while herself being a card that is very easy to fit into the early game turns. It's easy to play her alongside other cheap cards like Forge or Deadpool or Wolverine, and then follow up with a Destroy effect to do what your deck is trying to do while also getting ahead on energy. And this is especially relevant towards the last turn of the game, or even turn 5, being able to cheat out Null a turn early, or being able to play your Deadpool alongside your Null on the final turn of the game, often while dodging priority so the opponent can't easily interact with it. So if they really want to go hard on the archetype, I could see them going after X23. I do think it would be a shame because I really like the card, but if they put X23 to a 2-cost card like Wolverine, maybe gave her an additional stat to compensate, it would likely slow down Destroy by a pretty significant amount. It would also make it so Killmonger can't kill X23 anymore, so you can't be using Killmonger to blow up your Deadpool and X23 on turn 5 to be able to play the Deadpool Null on the final turn of the game. Again, not a change I'm hoping they go for, but it's also a change that it wouldn't surprise me a whole ton to see. I do think it is very much the nuclear option if they want to go really hard on a nerf, so kind of hoping that's not the way they go, but I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. And then in more positive news, buffs. So are there any plans to buff or rework Elsa? Hi, I've been super excited for this week's Spotlight roster because of the Comic Galactus variant. However, I feel a bit worried with the 25% chance of getting Elsa, considering her place right now. Even since she was changed to only affecting her own location, it's felt like she can only ever be used well in bounce or move decks. This has probably made her cube rate and stuff fall off a ton, right? Thanks in advance for the reply. Yes, we have an improvement to Elsa already implemented in a future patch. So, Elsa is terrible. Elsa went from being one of the most busted cards in the game to being kind of mediocre to being complete dog shit. They really screwed her over, like incredibly hard when they decided, well, we're changing our philosophy, so 2-drops are only going to affect their own lane. In my opinion, it was incredibly stupid to make that change to Elsa. While in general, I don't think the philosophy is necessarily a bad thing for things like Luke Cage, who we will talk about in a minute, and like global effects like that. Elsa's effect really did not seem to be problematic to pretty much anyone after the initial nerf from 3 power to 2 power. It made her kind of a unique card and one that was fun to build around, and when you couple that with the fact that they changed the timing so she no longer works with things like Spider-Man, the card just got so much worse, and it's really been struggling to find a home ever since. That's been a pretty big feels bad for people who bought Elsa in the season pass, or who opened her in the spotlight system or paid tokens for her when she was a better card. Now she's a really terrible card, and people want to be able to play with this card they bought. So in terms of buffs, I think at the least they need to restore her multi-lane capability. It's honestly insane to me they got rid of that. In case you haven't noticed, it is really hard to completely fill 2 or 3 lanes in a game of Marvel Snap. That is not something that's easy to do. So I don't think it's unreasonable that the effect is going throughout multiple lanes, because it's not something that's going to be consistently happening. And if it is, it's something you very much have to completely build your deck around to accomplish. So that's definitely a way I could see them going. I would prefer they leave her a 2-drop, though I do kind of wonder how busted original Elsa would be if she was a 3-drop, where original stats, original effect, maybe another point on there to make her a little more on rate for a 3-drop. But would a Elsa that gave +3 in any lane that was filled, like the old one, would that be busted as a 3-drop? I'm not too sure. Maybe, maybe not. I don't think that's the way they're going to go. But who knows, anything's possible with this one. I think this is likely going to be a patch change. They specifically mention a patch. You know, they could be referring to the OTA, they do have that technology, but when they specifically mention, hey, we've implemented this in a future patch, that usually is referring to the full client patches. And when is that happening? That is likely to be happening this coming Tuesday. So if you don't know the patch cycle, it is Pono, patch, OTA, nothing OTA. And we are currently on that last OTA cycle before the cycle repeats itself. So OTA will be coming tomorrow on Thursday. That's likely when we will see this change to Destroy. And Elsa and potentially this next change we're going to talk about, I think are more likely to happen in the patch for the new season, which is probably coming on Tuesday. Plans to rework Luke Cage. Glenn, since you said that Elsa is getting an update in the future patch, are there any plans to do something with Luke Cage as well? It'd be nice to have Luke Cage back to a global effect, even though that would mean making him more expensive. And the response is stay tuned. And what does stay tuned mean? That means they're pretty much doing exactly that, but he doesn't want to give specifics. That's pretty much what has happened every time we have gotten the stay tuned response, or at least the majority of the times. So yeah, they're probably going to make Luke Cage a 3-drop that provides the global effect of the board. I think Luke Cage wasn't the best thing to have as a global effect with a 2-drop. In the past, he was really strong, especially in metas that were focused on scaling. Scaling isn't as big of a focus of the game right now. Maybe that'll change in the future, but that is one of the reasons Luke Cage fell off, is because he was protecting your big scaling threats from having their stuff reduced via Shadow King. And well, there aren't really many big scaling threats anymore. It's really just playing big stuff that gets dealt with by Shang-Chi a lot of the time. So Luke Cage has fallen off value there. And I think he was obviously better as a global effect. I think he was more interesting as a global effect. And I think it's likely they end up making him a 3-cost card to do that. I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up as kind of a mirror to Kyera, being a 3/4 with his current ongoing effect, but instead of the single lane affecting the whole board. I think in general that'd probably be a better thing for Luke Cage. It'll be meta dependent, but one of the things I really liked about Luke Cage was being able to help you out from those annoying locations. And when you're playing Luke Cage out on turn 2 in the current form, you still have a unrevealed location. So maybe it's a location you want to have that Luke Cage effect in, and you just don't know that playing him out on curve. That feels kind of bad. It's going to feel bad for Cerebro 3 players, as they really appreciate having Luke Cage, but he's bounced around through, different Cerebro archetypes before, and he'll probably do the same again. Maybe C4 will be happy to have him as an addition. I think he's going to be very meta dependent though, and as previously mentioned, this is not a meta that scaling is the kind of big thing you're focused on doing. The majority of the cards that marginally scale upwards have been nerfed into the ground and can't really reasonably compete right now. That's something I hope changes for the future, but until it does, and until there are more scalable threats worth protecting, I don't think a change like this is likely to bring Luke Cage back into the forefront of the meta. And the last question we have here is kind of about the balance philosophy and a reaction to the destroy stuff. A lot of people don't seem to be too pleased about the fact that destroy is going to be getting nerfed, especially when, in a lot of people's opinion, this is one of the more balanced and varied metas we've had in a while, probably in the last 5 months or so. So the question is, saw a screenshot of the Discord on Twitter that said there were plans to nerf Destroy. Does this mean that the game is actually attempting to move to a more chaos-heavy system and away from decks being balanced? I know Destroy has been good, but as someone who's played and played against a lot of Destroy, it feels as though Destroy is the only consistently balanced deck in the game. With Shang-Chi and Shadow King, you take away the high power options, armor is an early game killer. It just feels like this ain't happening to balance the game, but rather to push money. And the response, we have balance thresholds for decks and cards that determine outliers in performance. When something distinguishes itself as an outlier over a meaningful sample of time, we take measured action. That's the key difference to our corrective balance strategy and fairly typical of most live balance. But this is the more interesting part. Another purpose of our balance changes is to create flux and change in order to ensure the metagame doesn't just remain diverse, but also remains interesting every week. We don't view this as chaotic, but it is purposely disruptive. It is also purposefully impermanent. If we make a change and wind up disliking the results, we're always willing to revert or try something else. Both of these elements set Snap apart from many other games in the genre. We're not predicting the future, just making educated guesses. We prefer to make our guesses, learn, and then learn the results. Even the bad ones contribute to a dynamic play experience. Over time, we hope to reduce our regrets, of course. If you haven't been paying attention to how they balance Marvel Snap, I don't think this should be a surprise. The short version of this statement is, yeah, we change shit for the sake of changing shit. Get used to it, because we're not going to change that. That's really the blunt way of saying it. It's been a thing I've critiqued about quite a few times, and probably will in the future, but I don't expect it to change. They very much are set in stone on this philosophy, and I think this is coming at, this is kind of the cost of them having a game with such a limited collection of cards. Yes, the amount of new cards is increasing this year, 1 new card a month, but in general, Snap releases very, very few cards, right? Compared to other card games, there isn't really filler, there aren't expansions. You get 1 card a week, and they're trying to shake things up a bit more than just with that 1 card a lot of the time, because truthfully, it's hard to shake up a metagame with just 1 card, especially when oftentimes 1 card is not going to create an archetype on its own. And then that's where the collection system has its issues come into play, because, well, it's kind of hard to build archetypes off of 1 card when archetypes often need multiple layers of support. It's not impossible. I mean, we've seen it done in the past with things like Loki or High Evolutionary, but it's definitely not the norm. And for that reason, people kind of gravitate towards, certain cores of decks like Darkhawk, Sarah Control, Thanos, like just decks that have been around for a very, very long time. Maybe they make a slight adjustment to try out some cool new card, but there are a lot of these cores that are kind of evergreen throughout Snap, though they do have their ups and downs depending on what are the most powerful things at the time. The thing I think that sucks about this balance philosophy is the fact that not everyone's going to enjoy these different fluxes or these different things they're trying out for a period of time. It also can feel kind of artificial. And I think that's what a lot of players are kind of annoyed about with this change that's coming, is the fact that they feel like they're enjoying the game and they're enjoying variety now. And after the last few months of balance really leaving the game out of whack more often than not, I think there's a low amount of confidence that these changes might be for the better, which I think is pretty fair given how abysmal the state of balance has been ever since pretty much the Loki season. But one of the other issues here is the fact that you can't choose to sit out time and snap without falling massively behind. So I think it would be more okay that they have this approach to philosophy if it was reasonable for a player to say, hey, I don't really like all the slamming big cards. So I'm not really going to play a whole ton during the Scar season. But maybe Thanos or maybe whatever stuff is coming in February or March interests me a lot more. So I want to come back for that season and I want to play in that one. That is not something you can reasonably make a decision to do, because if you stop playing Snap, you fall massively behind in resources, and then you are often not able to engage with the new content. So I think the way their economy is structured and their card acquisition works, it really would be a lot better for the player base if people were able to take breaks from the game when they don't enjoy it. But instead, Snap has you on this constant live service treadmill. I think leads to a lot of people burning out and quitting the game when they feel like they're forced to play the game when they might not really want to because they're not particularly enjoying that meta. And speaking of the meta, I did want to touch on that a bit. I do feel like we're in a bit of a rock, paper, scissors triangle. And while this is better than it has been for, probably the last 5-6 months, where it felt like there has always been just one big circle of the best thing to play and then the few small things that try and compete with it. We are in a more balanced and varied meta, but I do think we are starting to see that settle a bit. And there are 3 main rock, paper, scissors elements to it. You have the tech decks that are pretty much all playing Zabu and Shang-Chi and some wide variety of tech cards, if not just those 2. Then you have the big points decks like Destroy and Thanos Blob that are able to consistently output a large numbers that are generally larger than most of the other decks in the game. And then you have the combo decks, and the combo decks can put out even higher numbers than the big points decks. However, they are less consistent and more fragile. This consists of things like Hela Tribunal together, but these decks are able to put out pretty much the largest stats in the game and in general are a lot less soft to tech. Yes, the Tribunal really doesn't appreciate Enchantress, that's kind of its hard counter, but on the flip side, if the opponent isn't running Enchantress, there really isn't much of a reasonable way to interact with that deck at all. And Hela is rather hard to interact with as well, as they often are able to throw priority and then use Hela to cheat out a bunch of big stats in unpredictable ways that your opponent can't really interact with outside of maybe guessing a lucky Cosmo or Alioth on the final turn of the game. These decks have a harder time versus the big points decks because even though they can put out more stats, they are often less consistently doing so than the dedicated big points decks. However, they have a big advantage versus a lot of the tech stuff, as with things like Hela, you can't really easily interact with the tech cards that are common in tech decks, and Tribunal really puts people on Enchantress or Bust, which not every tech deck has Enchantress, and those that do, well, you're not going to draw it every game. And of course, you do have some decks that fall kind of in the middle space between some of these archetypes. Darkhawk, good example of that, where Darkhawk is a tech deck a lot of the time. However, it's also trying to use disruption and it's putting out points. Maybe not as many points as the big points decks, but a decent amount of points in its own right. And part of the power there is the disruption, not only with your tech cards, but with potentially denying your opponent's draws with Rocks and Black Widow. And in my experience, though there is a good variety and that variety is nice, it does feel like a lot of decks are boiling down into these 3 core aspects, and as time has gone on, we've really seen these decks be very refined, and it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot of innovation still happening here. I think a really funny example of this is in the testing with Beta Ray Bill. One of the better builds I've seen and tried out is essentially just Sarah control, except you're just dropping Sarah and another card or 2 for the Beta Ray Bill Thor Jane package. And the ultimate reality of these situations is there's just going to be a best version of the deck that does that thing, and there are going to be other versions that, they coast off of that strength, but they don't quite live up to it. I think that's what we're seeing right now. I think though there are a lot of decks out there, a lot of the decks are really just doing these core 3 things, and it wouldn't hurt to diversify kind of what decks are fighting for the top 3 spots of these archetypes. Now we know Destroy is going to get hit, so that is going to be messing with the big points paradigm, right? But are the other 2 going to get hit? My predictions, I don't think they're going to go after tech cards at all. They've been pretty reluctant to do that in the past, though who knows. I wouldn't mind them going after the combo aspect a little bit. I do like the combo decks, but I also think the Tribunal combo stuff is very reminiscent of old Galactus in a way, where it puts you on have the tech card answer or bust a lot of the time, which feels pretty bad. And this was the reason for the complaints and eventual nerfing of original Galactus, was the fact that if you weren't running Debris or Arrow or a very niche specific tech card, which in this case is Enchantress, you just couldn't interact with what the deck was doing, and it felt really bad to play against. I do think they could manage this fairly easily with a very minor change, which would be making Tribunal a 10 power card so it actually dies to Shang-Chi, so a more common tech card can reasonably deal with it, rather than having that one tech or bust. I'm sure there are other ways they could go about approaching it, but it definitely feels very solitary with kind of little downside, aside from a very polarized matchup spread against decks that are running Enchantress. And I think it would make for a much better play experience if they found another way for decks to be able to interact with it. But yeah, that's going to wrap things up for this one. Just wanted to get those thoughts out there, as well as the news on the cards that are going to be changing. Let me know what you think in the comments below. The Destroy stuff has been fairly controversial, so I am interested to see what ends up happening with it tomorrow, and I'll do my best to have some new decks out for the cards that have been changed as the patch goes live. That's going to wrap it up for this one, though. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.